Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Congregation KINS. Is Wednesday night Parsha Shir, and want to welcome everybody and wish you Chodesh Tov. It's still Chodesh Tov, and to wish everybody a very wonderful Purim, which is coming up, and that's going to be the focus of this evening's Shir. This Shabbat. We will be reading Parashat Tetzaveh, but we're also, of course, going to include a special reading for Parashat Zachor, Shabbat Zachor. The reading is taken from Sefer Mishnah Torah, and it's to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of eradicating a Amalek. And we're going to talk a little bit about whether that is something that we can do now, or can we only do it metaphorically. But in either case, we'll be talking about that this evening. We're going to start now with a statement by the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, in the Sefer Shoftim, not Tanakh, but in the section of Mishnah Torah of Shoftim, and Hilchos Malachim. Actually, not Shoftim, but we'll be reading Hilchos Malachim. So we're going to begin. It'll be a relatively short reading, but we'll see what the Rambam has to say about what Jews should do when they come into Eretz Yisrael, what they had to do or were commanded to do once they entered Eretz Yisrael, and when they had completed the kibush v'chiluk, the subjugation of the land itself, and chiluk, and then the partitioning of the plan according to of the land according to the Shiftei Israel, tribes of the Jewish people, and also in light of their division of the land to everyone. They're all the way down to families. So let's begin now. The Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim, Umilchamotehem, and their battles, which they wait a second. I think we have some people here. All right, I think we should. There we go. We've just begun now talking about the Rambam's view regarding what are the three mitzvot the Jews have to do upon entrance into Eretz Yisrael, subjugation of the hostile enemies, and as well the then distribution of the land. So the Rambam says in Perek Aleph, the first halacha, Shalosh mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael b'sha'at knisatan la'aretz, that there were three primary national mitzvot the Jews had as a nation when they entered Eretz Yisrael, and again, when they had cleared it away for the Jews to be able to live and reside there as a nation. And they are as follows. Lemanot lahem melech. First, they had to appoint for themselves a melech, and how that was done is we find in Sefer Shmuel, Perek Tet, Shaul became the first Melech Israel. Usually, it was done. Chazal tell us that the king must be affirmed through a shivim zekanim and through a navi. Okay, but right now that was the first thing they did. Shmuel was given the requirement. Hashem told him to go and to meet Shaul for the first time, who at that point thought he was looking for donkeys. Okay, his father sent him out, and remember, a donkey then is like a car now. It was not, or better yet, a pickup truck now. You lose that, you lose an awful lot of income. So his father Kish said, "Look, these donkeys are gone. Go find them." And when Shaul thought he was looking for donkeys, it turns out he found the Malchut Yisrael, or the Malchut Yisrael found him. It was a joint procedure. Sometimes we think that we are engaging in the most mundane of activities, and really those activities have long-term consequences for the individual, or the nation in this case. So the first thing is they are to appoint a king, as Shmuel did. In Emar, Som Tasim Alecha Melech. Now the Rambam is sort of, there's a machloket as to whether the appointing of a king is reshut. It's something that is not obligatory, but rather the nation can choose to have a melech, or some people, as the Rambam holds, it's a mitzvah. And then he says, the second of the mitzvot that the Jews were to perform on a national level, that was to destroy Amalek. Shneimar, Timche, et Zecher Amalek. And that, of course, as you know, is the mitzvah that we will read according to everybody thinks it's a mitzvah d'oraita for men. It's a machloket, whether it's a mitzvah d'oraita for women. But in either case, it's clearly a very important mitzvah that all people, if possible, should engage in. And then the third of the mitzvot, the Rambam tells us, v'livnot beit ha'bechira, to build the Beis HaMikdash. Shneimar, yishichno, yidrishu, uvata shama. In other words, we were to have a place that is the symbolic residence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God, Melo Chol Haaretz Kvodo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's residence is everywhere. But we need a primary location for that. And that was the Beit HaMikdash. And so he says there's an order to this as well. Minui melech chodem lemilchemet Amalek. First, you got to have a king. Then once you have a king, that king is directed to carry out the mitzvah of destroying Amalek. Shneimar oti shalach Hashem limshachacha lemelech. Shmuel, upon meeting, or after he met Shaul, gives him his directive, and that is to destroy Amalek. And so therefore Hashem had told him that. Kita et Amalek. That's what you are supposed to do. Okay? And then the Rambam says, so that was the second mitzvah. The third mitzvah is in the order of the performance, Zvachratat Zera Amalek Kodemet Levinyan Abayit. That first Amalek has to be eradicated, and then the Beit HaMikdash can be built. Now, of course, there was I don't know whether we'd call it a half-hearted attempt on the part of Shaul. We read that in this week's Haftarah, which is taken from, again, Sefer Shmuel. And it is very clear that Shaul lost his melucha because he didn't fulfill that directive of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that was given to him through Shmuel. He left Agag, the king of Amalek, alive. And according to our tradition, because he did that, Agag managed to be able to have a night of intimacy, which led ultimately to Haman, who is not only the actual, but he's also the symbolic oppressor of the Jews, the first person who attempted genocide in a very concrete way. So that's what the Rambam tells us. That the three mitzvot are to appoint a king. Second mitzvah then is to eradicate Amalek, and the third is that then at that point the Beit HaMikdash can be built. David wanted to fulfill that mitzvah, no question about it. That's what David wanted to do, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu said you can't, because your hands are meleot dam. You've had too much bloodshed in your life, and the Beit HaMikdash, the Mizbeach, those two central places of worship and avodah to Hashem, they represent people who are not involved in bloodshed. Now, I thought tonight what we'll do is we'll read the verses just before the three verses of Shabbat Zachor, which is, of course, the last aliyah we have. And then Haftarah will recount how Shaul failed to fulfill the mitzvah. And that's why he lost the Melucha, because it was one of the three mitzvot upon which the Jewish people was predicated. And the Melech was supposed to do it. The Melech doesn't do it, so he loses his mouth. And of course, we know that Shaul, as great as he was, clearly at the beginning of his Melucha, had a character flaw. He allowed himself to be led and did not lead. And then, of course, he, so to speak, deceived himself into thinking that he fulfilled the mitzvah of Hashem. It's really worthwhile to read the entire Haftarah, because as is often the case, I like to point out the Medrash is not just telling us about Shaul, or the Tanakh is not just telling us about Shaul, it's telling us about us. Because whatever shortcomings he had, we can find in abundance in all of us. So most of the time, I try to tell people, particularly my students, that I have enough difficulty judging myself. I really shouldn't be involved in judging them per se. Obviously, we have to judge actions, yes, but not necessarily people, but actions. The horrific pogrom that took place by Jews at an Arab village, that's a pogrom. I can't judge those people, but I can judge the act. The act was horrific and not worthy of an Am Kadosh, not at all worthy of an Am Kadosh. But now we're going to read just before Parshat Zachor, Pasuk, we're going to start with Perek Kafhei, Pasuk, Tetvav, Yodala. Now, this is not what we will be reading, but it has a very important lesson for all of us that Rashi brings. The Pasuk, again, starts with Pasuk Yud Gimel. I'm going to read it relatively quickly. The concept is relatively easy. Lo yeh lecha b'chischa even va'aven. You may not have with you two in your pocket. There were no pockets in those days, but there were pouches in which people kept money and legal tender. Can't have even va'aven. You can't have two different sets of stones. One that is actually, shall we say, a kilo, and one that is 1 or 2 ounces less than a kilo. It's the equivalent of having two sets of books. So therefore, the trickery that goes on within business is not new. It's in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he felt it was important enough in the desert. Now, by the way, when we say Ein Mukdam Muchar BaTorah, we don't mean that there is no chronological order to the Torah. There is a chronological order to the Torah. But sometimes that chronological order is superseded by another important element. But by and large, of course, there's a chronological order. It starts with Bereshit, the Torah, and it ends with Le'enei Kol Yisrael, and the Jews enter Eretz Yisrael, and we see incident after incident. Sometimes the Torah will report two incidents that are not consecutive and interrupt it with some other important message. And that is the case here. The Torah tells us that you have to be honest in business dealing. But it's not so simple. The Torah says, Lo yeh lecha b'veitecha efa ve'efa. You are not allowed to have in your house, again, a different set of measures for grains rather than, let's say, meat or other such things, if we're paying by weight. Now, there's a very beautiful expression that we have. It's part of the Klal Yisrael's Masorah, but also the word efa ve'efa is because in Israel, of course, it's Hebrew. So if someone is showing giving an advantage, an unfair advantage to one person or another, or showing preference in the classroom or in the workplace, that's called efa ve'efa. You have to treat everybody under the same set of rules. Look, there are people that are working better at what they do, either because they try harder or because they're more proficient. That's something else. That's not the violation of Eifah ve'Eifah. All right. But Eifah ve'Eifah is you have two people who are essentially the same. And nevertheless, because you don't like you want to talk, you'd like a taller person or a shorter person, or again, sometimes you need a taller person for the job, but otherwise they're all equal. And every other way they're equal. And yet you decide to choose because you happen to like that person, or he's a relative, or something of that nature. So that's called Eifah ve'Eifah. You have to treat everybody with the same set of criteria in order to reward them, or in some cases not to. Okay? Gedola uktana. Then the Torah goes in and it tells us that we have to have Evan Shlema Vatzedek. We have to have just scales and weights and measures. Yalach. Now, lach is really the same thing as lacha here. But since there is a what we call a melech, trop is separate. It tells the Baal Kriya that to slow down. Eifah shlema vatzedek yalach. Both the stones and the grain weights. Why? The man yarichu yamecha. That you, both as individuals, particularly though the nation, aladama, a nation that lives with just business ethics, that society will prosper more. Now comes the very important part. All the psukim are equally important. But here for us, we want to focus on. Anybody who engages in unjust, unethical business practices commits a to'eva. Now, I always ask, so what is a to'eva? And I always get the answer, an abomination. So I ask then, what is an abomination? Some people are smart and they say to'eva. But the point is that abomination is not the appropriate translation. Let me tell you what is the appropriate translation. The Torah, Onkelos, who was extremely precise in his translations into Aramaic, a person who was a ger. He was born a Jew, but he rose to the heights of Jewish scholarship and, of course, Jewish living. He wrote as follows: Arei merachak kadam Hashem Elokecha. All right, the people who do this, they distance themselves from God. You might get closer. Your budget problems may be solved more that way, but you get further from God. And that is what it means. Mirachak, person who engages in deceptive business practices, distances himself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Another way to interpret it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu distances himself from this person, but the effect is the same. There can't be a greater punishment. To be different, to be distant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That there is no greater punishment. So therefore, one has to recognize it. And so also it's mentioned by other things too, homosexual behavior, and it also is indicative that we pick and choose. Some people, and of course, if the Torah tells us that illicit sexual behavior is a to'eva, it's true. It is merachak, person, or marcheket atzmo, person distances himself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we still need to know that business ethics are equally reprehensible in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sometimes we pick and choose. Oh, this is terrible. This is not so terrible. So we have to be careful, and also we have to be very careful about how we treat people in general. We need to be people are people, and we have to treat everybody with some degree of dignity, especially if there's no bezdin which is around, etc. We have to be careful how we treat the people who come under this category of to'avat Hashem Elokecha. And of course, the main thing I want to mention regarding this is where Kodesh Baruch Hu says, where David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Kirvat Elokim li tov. The greatest good that I could ever experience is to be close to Hashem. So we want to make sure that in this area or other areas where we see to'eva, can a person do tshuva? Yeah, they could do tshuva. Yeah, sure. But we can't kid ourselves. We become distanced from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, wherever the Torah tells us that a certain behavior is to'eva. And that, again, I want to stress, but that doesn't mean we can ever deliberately humiliate another human being to treat them as a subhuman and say that. We don't have that right. But on the other hand, we have to know what behaviors are wrong. Now we come to Parshat Zachor. Zachor pasuk Yud Zayin. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. You have to remember what Amalek did to you. Now, what is it that Amalek did to us? Look, we've had more than our share of pogroms and hatred, and genocide, and burnings and murders in our people's history. The Torah tells us, though, here, remember what Amalek did to you when you left Mitzrayim. You were weak. You were nobody. He assumed you couldn't defend yourself. He had no reason to attack you. There was no real reason to attack you. Purely the joy of killing. Kaderech, who were along the way, that say Techem Mitzrayim. Then the Torah tells us, Asher karcha baderech. Rashi gives us three interpretations. One was he contaminated you spiritually. Another one is that, of course, that karcha means that he cooled you off. You were engaged in wonderful passion and involvement with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kirvat Elokim li tov. What did he do? Rashi gives the example, which is in the Medrash, that it's like a person. There's a real hot bath, so a person or water, and a person jumps in and cools it off. That's what happens to liquids. The waters either move upward if heat is poured in, or the temperature moves down. And so that's the second one. And the third one is Asher Karacha, who came upon you. And Asher Karacha, that means to say that there was no battle, there was no precipitating event which would lead them to attack you. And then Vayizanev Bicha, and he tailed you, against you. Whom did he tail? Kol HaNechashalim, all of the weak people. Ve'ata ayef v'yageh, and you had been ayef v'yageh. Ayef means tired and weary. Lo yorei Elokim, and did not fear God. Now the Torah tells us in the last psukim that therefore, because this happened, the next two psukim, it tells us that therefore we have the mitzvahs. The Rambam tells us that once we have a melech, and once we are settled in the land, and we've distributed the land, when Hashem gives us respite and gives us the ability to live in some degree of tranquility, that's when you have to take care of a melech. Now, the real question is two things. Number one, when it says you were weary, tired, and did not fear God. The question is, who didn't fear God? Okay. Now the whole pasuk, as a matter of fact, all the psukim prior to this is talking about why we have the mitzvah of eradicating Amalek, and it would seem then, if that's the case, the context would tell us that that's why we have to eradicate him. So therefore, v'lo yarei Elokim, the one who did not fear God, is Amalek. And in fact, the Sifrei says to us, the Sifrei Zuta says to us, what does it mean? Ata savur al mi shenemar nemar zeh v'lo yarei Elokim. You're thinking that when it says v'lo yarei Elokim, it's talking about Amalek. The Chola pasuk kulo nemar al Yisrael. But the Medrash says, but the truth is though, the Torah is talking to the Jews. talking to the Jews and about Amalek. So which is it? Lo Yoreh Elokim. So the Medrash tells us, at least in this case, the Sifrei Zuta says that Lo Yoreh Elokim, that it's referring to Amalek. And that makes a certain sense, because why else would we have the obligation to eradicate Amalek? Enemies, we got plenty. But when the Torah goes out of its way, it tells us the Psukim that it's referring to them. But still, the Mechilta tells us something else. Davar Acher, Aban whom it says Lo Yoreh Elokim, that he did not fear God. Ella al Yisrael. It was the Jews who didn't fear God. Okay? Shehayu Acherim Omrim, a third party would say, V'lo Yoreh Elokim, he did not fear God. Right? They'd be saying it about the Jews. Elu Yisrael, these are the Jews. Shelo ayu bi'adam mitzvot. They did not maintain a high level of mitzvot, and therefore they weren't Yoreh Elokim. So now Rashi sides with the first view, and that is that the context is why anybody should get such a severe punishment. It must be Amalek, because it's referring to Amalek who didn't fear God. They ignored everything that happened in Mitzrayim, at Har Sinai, in Kriyat Yam, all that they ignored, and they still attacked. But Chizkuni takes the side of the Medrash and says, no, it wouldn't happen to you if you had observed the mitzvah. It wouldn't have happened to you if you just would have observed the mitzvot. Here's an interesting case where you can honestly say that these two concepts are not mutually exclusive. They both can reside at the same time. Both can function at the same time. Amalek is going to get his. Why? Because of what he did. But whom does he do it to? And how does he succeed? Because we were emotionally, spiritually weak, not just physically weak. Now, I'm going to ask you all a question that you can answer, each to his or her own satisfaction. What is the mitzvah of deceptive business practices doing with Amalek? That mitzvah could have been brought anywhere. Hashem gave Moshe Rabbeinu a certain license to place certain things in one next to juxtapose them, put them near one thing or another. So why do we have this mitzvah? It could have been anywhere. And it certainly could have been it could have been in Mishpatim, it could have been in so many different places. Here, as we say in Yiddish, mittendrin, in the middle of everything, boom, we're learning about Amalek, and all of a sudden now we find the mitzvah of deceptive practices in business. And it seems that that's the right place for it. Because Rashi tells us, we want to know why this mitzvah is mentioned here. So he tells us, mentioned here, because that anyone, because a person, one person or the nation, if you lie and deceive in the area of weights and measures, business itself takes care of so many facets of life. If you're deceptive in business practice, you need to be worried about the provocation of the enemy. What's the two have to do with each other? It seems it's pretty clear. If people cannot trust other people, their neighbors, the people we work with, the people we work for, that at any juncture they can deceive us, can take our money unjust, or to deceive us regarding time and how much they'll pay per hour, et cetera, et cetera. So that sows mistrust. It sows disdain between people who need to love each other. So once I can't trust you and you can't trust me, and neither of us can trust Yankel down the block, we're all looking at each other, not looking out for each other, just looking over our shoulders what's going to happen? Oh, when that happens, so the evil people in the world they look for weaknesses. When they look for it, they'll find it. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, undoubtedly with the Kodesh Baruch Hu's approval, placed this mitzvah of business deception right in front of Amalek. Because you want to know when he'll be most successful? When we as Jews are fragmented in our relationships with others. That in fact will say that we treat each other as an it, something we can get from the next person. We don't see them as the phrase goes. Rabbi Yosheber uses the phrase too. Rabbi Yosheber, they don't see the neighbor as a thou. Thou mean to say endowed with godliness. How could I ever cheat somebody if it's on my mind that person was created by none other than the Borei Olam, the creator of the world? How could I ever cheat him? How could I ever lie? How could I ever embarrass him? How could I ever in any way deliberately reduce their status as a human being and reduce them to an it, something which is only exists for my benefit? When that happens, that's when we lose our collective social traction, and we are then subject to the attack of the enemy. Well, with this we'll conclude. We can see here that, of course, Parsha, just to review, of course, that we know we have 3 mitzvot at the beginning. The Rambam mentions them, and that is the mitzvah is to eradicate, it's just a point of a melech, eradicate Amalek, and then to build the Beit HaMikdash. So we only have 2 right now. What's the Amalek in our days, by the way? Amalek, we all have, I believe, a possibility of Amalek within. We have to be very, very careful. Revenge, when people engage in revenge, that's much like Amalek. When people engage in Lashon Hara, what satisfaction does a person get out of Lashon Hara? That's Amalek. And what we have to do is to enhance the Avraham Avinu within us. That's what we have to do. And of course, we have certainly much more of an opportunity to have the Amalek show than to have the much greater chance to have the Avraham Avinu show rather than Amalek. So Yehi Ratzon, let it be that each of us will make up our mind to eradicate that element of Amalek within us. Hurting just for the sake of hurting. That's what Lashon Hara is. Nobody gains from Lashon Hara. But hurting just for the sake of hurting, that's Amalek. And by doing that, and simultaneously elevating the Avraham Avinu, which is in us, who said, of course, who saw himself as the advocate of humanity. Oh, if that's the case, then not only will we have Eretz Yisrael and some small measure of Malchus, then maybe we'll also see the Beit HaMikdash. I've been there with you. Okay, everyone. I wish everybody a good Shabbos and a very, very joyful Purim. No reason not to meet next week on Wednesday. That's after Shushan Purim. So all the best to everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Have a good Shabbos and a Chag Sameach.
As long as no one's too hungover on Wednesday.
Yeah. You needn't worry about me.
No, right.
No, I'm kidding. All right. Okay, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Enjoy.